call them what they want to be called, and you're already making such a huge impact on their life. And that kind of thing, I think, really, when I see the numbers about, how negatively impacted they may be, depending on where they are, who they live with, that sort of thing, what they have access to, what kind of healthcare or gender affirming resources they have access to, it fires me up, as you can tell.
Welcome back to the Prepared School Psych Podcast. On today's episode, I am chatting with Katie Peterson a little bit about Katie. She is a nationally certified school psychologist and licensed educational psychologist with over 10 years of experience in public schools in the San Francisco Bay Area. She currently serves an elementary school and assists the preschool assessment team in Santa Clara Unified School District in California. Katie is passionate about special education and mental health policy, actively engaging in advocacy at the California State Capitol. Her interests include mental health awareness, autism spectrum disorders, and supporting LGBTQ+ youth. Katie also holds several leadership roles, including past president and current secretary of the Santa Clara County Association of School Psychologists, affiliate representative on the CAS Board of Directors, and adjunct professor at UMass Global. In her free time, it seems amazing that you even have free time. In her free time, Katie enjoys birding, scuba diving, woodworking, and quilting, and is a proud pet parent to her dogs and cats. I am so happy to have you here, Katie. Welcome.
I'm really excited to be talking to you this morning. Thank you for having me.
Of course, we kick off with the most important question. What is your favorite TV show you are watching right now?
Well, it's funny that you asked this because I spent the summer when I wasn't traveling binge watching all of the shows that have been nominated for Emmys. So I'm pretty much through most of them. I'm getting through Morning Show now, but my favorite so far has been Ripley with Andrew Scott. It's on Netflix. I highly recommend it. It's beautiful. It's a limited series, so it's only an 8-episode show, and it's incredible. So that's a really good one. Everyone should check it out.
Love this. I get so many ideas from asking people questions. So yay. Thank you. Thank you. In one sentence, how do you think your colleagues describe you as a school psychologist?
I would say my colleagues describe me as a positive, student-centered professional who is always open to problem solving, figuring things out, figuring out how we can best support our students.
I love that. Well, how long have you been in the field of school psychology? And at what point in your journey did you become interested in or kind of focused on supporting the LGBTQ+ community at your schools?
Yeah, so this is my 11th year as a credentialed school psych. I just got my LEP, my licensed educational psychologist license in November. So I'm doing some LEP stuff. So I would say that my journey has always included thinking about supporting the LGBTQ+ community. Even before I went to grad school, I was involved in the local community, going to pride parades and things with my family and marching in parades back home while I was still in high school. In grad school, there was a research paper we had to do. I ended up choosing to do it on, at that time, they were calling it sexual minority youth through NASP. So I wrote a research paper on that while I was in grad school. And it just kind of evolved as I've gone through working and learning my population and just trying to figure out how I can fit that work in to be as most effective as I can be.
Well, I know for a lot of school psychologists, this topic can seem daunting. Tell me about your learning curve with this topic. What has been that learning process for you?
I've given this topic as a presentation a lot of times, and I think what might scare people or what might feel daunting or overwhelming is all of the laws, like what is allowed, what is legal. But when you put that aside and you just think about the basics, it's very easy. Just stay student-centered. Stay student-centered in your work. Stay grounded in what is best and what is right to affirm and support and uplift this child that's in front of me. And it's very simple. So when I get into a rut where I'm like, what am I going to do? How am I going to do this? I go back to, well, what's best for the child? And then I try to navigate it from that lens. But the tricky thing is that the laws are always evolving and changing. And so the learning curve is kind of like ever evolving, and you just kind of have to stay on top of it. But if you know the resources to go to keep on top of that, it's easier. And I'm going to share some information about different resources, and we can have sent out to everyone so that they have a starting point.
Well, let's just talk about that piece since we're chatting about it right now. There's different laws in different states. There's appeals to different laws in different states.
Mm-hmm.
How can, like, from a practical standpoint, school psychologists keep up with the laws in their area that affect the students that they work with?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the easiest ways would be, I am on listservs for different LGBTQ communities in my area. And when there are laws being proposed that are going to be, that are transphobic or homophobic, or that are going to limit access to freedoms and to rights for the LGBTQ community, they're in those emails. So I know we have a ton of emails as school psychologists, but I highly recommend, no matter where you live in the country, you can look up, hopefully you can find an LGBTQ center in your community or even through your state, and get on that listserv, and that'll help you stay up to date. But there are also websites dedicated to tracking different laws and different buckets that relate to LGBTQ community. And so one of them, lgbtmap.org, I think it is, I'll send the link, it outlines every single law that exists throughout the entire country. So you can click on your state, and then you can click on, for us, education, and you can see what laws exist that might impose harm on a child. Like in California, do our students have access to a bathroom that aligns with their gender identity? Yes. But in other states, no. So it shows you what the access is to all these different things. And there's also, those laws are outlined related to housing or related to healthcare. So it's a really great website. There's another one I've been watching. I forget what it's called. It's trans legislation tracker. And there's been a lot, just an explosion of anti-trans, transphobic laws that have been introduced over the last 4 or 5 years. And so that also is another place where I go to see where we're at across the country with laws that have been proposed, which ones have been, kicked down to the curb, which ones have gone forward and passed, so that we can just be aware of it.
And I'll make sure to get all of these links from Katie, and we'll add those to the show notes so that anyone listening can easily access these great websites, because it can't be very confusing. And I know a lot of people who work in school psychology might even work in more than one state. We have so many people now who are working remotely. And so you might be aware of laws in the state in which you reside in, which may differ from the laws in the state that you are supporting students in.
Right.
Well, tell me about your experience working with the LGBTQ community within the school systems. What are things that you, in your role as a school psychologist, have able to build, support, create? What types of things have you been able to do?
Yeah. So this is my chance to plug starting a GSA club at your school, or supporting one if it already exists. So GSA club stands for Gender and Sexuality Alliance. It used to be the Gay Straight Alliance. So for those of you millennials, probably when you were in high school, it was probably Gay Straight Alliance. Now it's evolved. There are other names for it. I've heard Unicorn Club or Skittles Club, Rainbow Club, whatever they want, whatever the kids want to call it. The social justice is the front and center. And I started with a colleague of mine who I love dearly. We started a GSA club at our middle school, and we did that for about 5 years. We facilitated this club for 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. It was incredible. And we'd always hold it. Clubs were on Fridays, and we would always have it Friday after school. And by that point, my cup is empty. I have nothing to give, but I would show up and they would fill my cup because it was just so fun. It was the most rewarding thing. So I switched to a different district, and I'm going to be starting a rainbow club at my elementary school this year. And I'm really excited about it because I think that there are so many resources that psychs can use to just get it going. It doesn't take a lot of legwork, and it is so incredible. And the research shows, there's been research done by GLSEN, especially, which is the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network, that has shown that a school that has a GSA club on campus positively affects an LGBTQ child's feelings of community, feelings of, wanting to go to school and feeling affirmed at their school, even if they don't participate in the GSA club.
Interesting.
Yeah. So the child doesn't even have to be a part of the club. Just knowing that it exists on their campus has a positive impact for them.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's one thing I always say. Think about it, try it. I know we all have so much on our plates, and it would likely mean maybe a little more report writing at home, but it made me feel so happy. And also I learned a whole lot about K-pop. I learned a lot of K-pop dance moves when I was doing it with the middle schoolers. We used to do, sometimes I'd have lessons. Sometimes I would just say, what do you want to do? We want to do a dance party. We want to do, arts and crafts, whatever. And we did a lot of dancing to BTS and Blackpink and stuff like that. So that's one thing. Other things that I've done. So I previously did work with my organization. I was at a charter organization. I worked at the regional level to support the addition of language in our discrimination and sexual harassment policies related to trans folks specifically. So for transgender and gender nonconforming people, we want to explicitly call out how we're going to protect them from harassment. GLSEN has a model policy for that. So school psychs can look into what your policies say, both for protecting students, protecting staff, protecting families. Does it specifically say something about supporting or protecting transgender people? And maybe that's an avenue that you could make a positive impact. So I did that work. I worked directly with training mental health clinicians and school psychs on how to use what's called a gender support plan, which is a tool, a really great tool. I can also share that.
Yeah.
For you have a kid who wants to go by different pronouns or wants to be called a different name. Okay, it sounds like they might be going through some type of transition. How can we support them through that transition? And there are people in the community who've already created resources that we just have to pick up and go page by page with the child and use the tools. And it doesn't have to be this scary, complex, convoluted process. If we use something like a gender support plan to support that child's transition. So that's something I've done directly with both middle and high schoolers, and also training others to use that tool. And currently, since I'm in a new district in Santa Clara, I sit on the Equity and Human Rights Committee, as well as the Equitable Practices and Inclusive Curriculum, the EPIC task force. So we worked together to update our board policies and regulations related to advocating for LGBTQ community, and especially related to, protecting students when it comes to them maybe coming out to folks on campus. And how do we protect them while they navigate that if they're not yet in a place where they're ready to share that with their family?
I'm curious, specifically, I guess let's go back to the GSA club. If a school psychologist is listening to this and they're just wondering, how do I even broach this conversation? I'm not quite sure how this is going to land with my administration, with PTA. Like, what are some tips that you would give for someone who's like, this sounds amazing, and how do I do this?
It is
Yes.
tricky. And I've had varying degrees of obstacles that have come in my way. And this is me speaking from a place where I live in a liberal area in California. I live in the Bay Area. And, I was actually kind of surprised with some of the things that I was coming up against. But so I think about that when I think about folks who are in other states where, there aren't protection. California has a law that specifically says if a child If a school has any other club on campus that is a non-academic club, the school cannot say no if you ask to start a GSA club, or if students want to start a GSA club, they are protected. They have a right to do that. So if there's a chess club or a robotics club or dance club, whatever other clubs may exist at that site, and then the students or staff say, we want to start a GSA, the principal can't say no. There's a law that says that. So that's great for California. But folks who are in other states may not have that protection. So I would say start with asking your school psych team, hey, do any of your obviously, does your school already have a GSA club? And if so, who's the advisor? But if not, ask the school psych team in your district, do any of your schools have a GSA club on site or something related to that social justice kind of focused club? And if there are none, then learning the landscape of your school and talking to people that you trust on campus about, is this something that makes sense? Could this be feasible? What do you think that the obstacles would be? That's kind of how I approached it when I started at a new school site. I talked to people who I felt I could trust, who'd been there for 10, 11 years.
Mm.
And I kind of got the lowdown before I went to my principal about it. So I took that route, and once it comes, the hard part is like getting the okay sometimes. The easy part is just like finding resources online. There are so many resources online for videos you can play with the kids, or worksheets and things that you can put together. There's always different events going on throughout the year that you can talk to students about and tie it into how we can build up our community, not just for LGBTQ youth on campus, but for people who have other diverse identities, so that intersectionality, you can play into that too, to always just have something to be kind of talking to your students about, and then really just change it up depending on their age level.
Well, you've already mentioned that sometimes taking on some of these things, like you had mentioned, Friday, you're already depleted, but you always felt like it filled your cup. We might have to write reports at home a little bit more. There's so many different things in our field. I'm just really curious, out of everything, you obviously are so passionate about this topic. Why is this topic so important to you that you are willing to do these extra steps?
I think, well, there's two reasons. One, okay, we're all data nerds because we're school psychs. And there's research that's being done by GLSEN, by the Trevor Project, by other organizations who are finding how difficult it is for LGBTQ youth to just be able to wake up and show up at school. LGBTQ youth, like, we've all seen the information. We've all seen the numbers. They have much higher rates, especially trans youth. And then when you add the race and ethnicity into it, and you think of trans youth of color, then the numbers of the children who are experiencing mental health issues, suicidality, familial rejection, homelessness. It's just wild to me that more people aren't talking about this and more people aren't doing this, because the things that we can do to counteract the kinds of protective factors that we can try and put in place in our schools really aren't that big of things, right? Like, I saw one data point from Trevor Project that said students whose pronouns were affirmed, like somebody who's using the name and pronouns that they would like other people to use for them, that protected them so much from just feeling like, they're worthy, it protected them from suicidality.
Yeah.
And that's a simple thing that you can do. It takes no resources. It may take a little brain power depending on the pronouns, and that pronoun conversion and grammar, because that's not my strong suit, but, practice it, and then just call them what they want to be called. And you're already making such a huge impact on their life. And that kind of thing, I think, really, when I see the numbers about, how negatively impacted they may be, depending on where they are, who they live with, that sort of thing, what they have access to, what kind of healthcare or gender affirming resources they have access to, it fires me up, as you can tell.
Yeah.
The other reason is it's personal for me too. I mean, I identify as bisexual. I have family members, I have friends, a lot of people in my life identify somewhere on the LGBTQ spectrum. And so I'm doing it for every one of them too.
I think it's so interesting, just the little bit that you've shared about using the pronouns that affirm the student, having just a club on your campus, you don't even need to attend it.
Yep.
Like you mentioned, these are things that are in some of our viewpoints, we think we have to do all these things. And these are so minimal, yet
Right.
the effect size of them is exponential. That's
Yeah.
incredible.
Starting introducing yourself with your pronouns, putting your pronouns in your email signature, or if you have access to business cards, on your business cards. I got some they're like these pride flags, but they're paper. They're like cardstock. I got them from a local LGBTQ affairs office within our county, and I put them up in the window of my office. So putting things up on the walls, or in windows, so that it's visible to other people on campus. That visibility, I think, is really important. GLSEN makes these really great safe space kits that have a sticker that says like safe space or safe zone. And I know other organizations have similar ones, but something like that with a little rainbow flag or however it's designed is another indicator for students that this is a person who may be more aware and may be more open to talking about identities, or maybe a place that I feel like I can be myself with. Those are very things that don't take a lot of work, but do have a really big impact.
And again, all of these wonderful resources that you are talking about here are going to be in our show notes.
Yes.
So just writing down the long list. I'm making sure everyone who's listening that we get all of this great information here.
Yeah.
So we've already talked about a lot of actionable steps for psychologists who are interested in learning more about this information, who may want to start some things or at least investigate what has been going on at our school. Is there anything else when you think about actionable steps? Because I know school psychologists, right? We're like, theory's interesting, data's interesting. What can I do with this? Is there anything else that you would add?
I think if you don't already, start following more queer folks of color on social media. The more visible people of different gender identities and sexual orientations are within your life, I think the more that you're going to just learn about how different gender identities or gender expressions can show up to different people. And that'll help you just even subconsciously, like as you're doom scrolling, you'll still be learning. So I can share some really great, I follow so many people on Instagram that it's just like, but I can share a few different like popular influencers. I can share their handles, and that's a recommendation I would have. Exploring the different websites to see, what you can kind of pull from. Another one to add to the list, Human Rights Campaign has this whole department called Welcoming Schools, and they've created a really great resource, like a wealth of resources related to especially books. So when you're thinking about if you have any in with curriculum development, or when you are supporting teachers with developing new or different lesson plans, there are lists of books or lessons that link in the Common Core standards. So there's ideas for ways that you can incorporate just different identities when you are giving like a math lesson. How can you make just everything that you do, everything that teachers do, be more inclusive? There's so much out there. It's just a matter of kind of, knowing where to find it.
Yeah. Well, you just mentioned a couple of things. You talked about curriculum. You talked about being on some different committees. And before you and I started recording, we were actually, for everyone else to know, we were also talking about literacy. And you were just mentioning how surprised you were that certain trainings that school psychologists were not being invited to. Like there was this new intervention that's going on. Yeah, school psychologists usually like to know about reading interventions.
Yep.
Now, we might not need to know it to the same extent as someone who's actually implementing it, but if we're taking this into consideration, isn't it helpful? How do you get yourself involved in all of these different things? Because a lot of times they don't think about, hey, we don't have a school psychologist on this committee here.
Yeah.
So how do you determine, here's how I want to use my time?
Well, I'm loud and I can talk a lot. So those are the two things. Just be loud and talk a lot and ask questions. No, I would say I came to this new district, and I guess even when I was at my other organization prior, it's just asking questions and asking about getting involved. I think half the time or more, my experience was I would say, "Hey, can I go to this training?" And I'd be like, "Oh, yeah, I didn't think about it." So it's not like they're trying to exclude school psychologists or they're trying. It's just that folks don't always have us in the forefront of their mind, and so I always ask, can I join that training? Can I participate in that thing? And then just seek out. Like when I joined Santa Clara Unified, I was on their website right before I even started. I was looking at the different, just learning about the district. I wanted to know what's going on in this district. And I found a page on the website that talked about committees. And one of them was an LGBTQ QIA plus committee. And I emailed the person that was listed and I said, "Hey, I just joined this staff. Can I be a part of this?" And they were like, "Sure." So my third day of work with the district was going to this committee meeting and networking. And a lot of it is just networking. And, that's the thing that school psychs do best is network. So I just asking questions, being open, networking, and coming in with a sense of how can I do this to help you improve in your work? How can I do this to help, my students improve? And I think when you have that mentality and you create that persona at work, you'll build up that reputation and then you'll get invited to so many more meetings. No, but then eventually, hopefully you'll affect change, right? Like that's the goal. So
It is always interesting when I think back on my career, how many times I just said yes to go to a meeting on something that 10 years later, I'm like, and now I'm doing this because I said yes 10 years ago
yep.
to come
Yep.
to a meeting. We don't quite know. And,
Right.
where things are going to lead us. I do want to point out that most of the things that you've shared today was not, we have to be in charge of everything. Because I
Right.
think that is something that a lot of school psychologists were always very protective of our time. And a lot of things that you can do, you can already be a part of other
Right.
committees and other groups and other clubs. No one's saying that you have to be in charge of all of this.
Right. I've given a training on this topic many times, and there's everyone that always comes into the room, and maybe they're coming into the room because they need the information, but they always say, "This is something that is already happening in my school site, and I didn't know enough about it, or I didn't know how I could support." So, whether or not you feel as a school psych right now, like you have the capacity to do this work is happening in some degree. And it could be really positive work because people are doing great work to advocate for rights of students. And it could be, depending on if you live where you live, it could be that there are board policies that are being passed that are forcing teachers to out students to their family. And that's really problematic and horrifying. And so something is happening in your district, whether it's positive or negative. And the question is, what is like the least restrictive way that you can get involved to kind of shift it to that positive, to the positive, or, just kind of bolster, the good things that are going on.
Wonderful. Okay, we love to ask all of our guests, reflecting back to when you started in this field. What advice would you give to a school psychologist who's just starting out in this most interesting field of school psychology?
Gosh. Yeah, I think, well, we kind of already touched on this because I was going to say, don't feel like you have to wait to start doing this work, because I remember my first couple of years, I was so focused on just learning how to write a really good report or learning how to really understand what an SLD is. So I was like so focused on that
Yeah.
that I was like, I'll do that, next year. Or I'll do it later. I'll do it later. And it's like, and then it took me 4 years before I felt like I could run a GSA club. And I'm like, man, I think back and I think I could have met so many more kids. I could have, just supported them for so much more time. So, um, going back to those little things, little changes, don't feel like you have to wait. Don't feel like you have to be a veteran. If you're new to the field, don't feel like you don't have enough experience or expertise or something to just start.
I love that. Well, this podcast is called the Prepared School Psychologist. When you think of the term prepared, what do you do to help yourself feel more prepared in your role?
I would say I am always communicating, as you can probably tell. I talk a lot. I communicate a lot. So consulting with other people, talking to the people on my team helps me feel prepared, in whatever situation I'm doing. I can communicate with my school psych team. Because I've networked and have made connections with school psychs in my county, with school psychs on the CAST board. I feel like I can consult with different folks depending on a situation I've got. And it helps prepare me for whatever life is throwing my way. That has made me feel like I'm continuing to be the most effective school psych I can be.
That's incredible. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today, Katie, and spending some time and sharing so many amazing resources with all of our listeners. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
All right, everyone. I hope you found today's episode of the Prepared School Psych Podcast informative. Remember, your expertise plays a vital role in advocating for. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on your preferred podcast platform. Your feedback helps us reach more school psychologists like you. Thank you for listening and have a great day. That concludes another episode of the Prepared School Psych Podcast. And I hope today's discussion equipped you not just with knowledge, but also the confidence to take action. Remember, every conversation we have and every resource we share builds a bridge towards a more inclusive and empowering learning landscape for our students. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to the podcast for more insightful conversations and resources to support your journey. Share this podcast with colleagues. We would love it if you would also rate and review the podcast. Thank you for tuning in. Just a reminder, everyone, the information and advice provided in this podcast are for guidance purposes only, and all listeners are required to follow both federal and state law and their own school district guidelines and policies. Thank you.